to think about the future, and then that different future you see have a better outcome in your life. For instance, people who are lonely do this all the time. They go, well, if I were to just meet somebody or have someone to love, or if I was loved, then I would be so much happier. What is so interesting about that is not only that it could be true, but the fact that you can actually think that way. You can actually believe that, and then make changes in your life to go out and experience that. That is one of the most incredible things about being a human being, and that is the capacity to dream. What makes it possible for you to dream when you're experiencing your life in the framework of time? Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. Today, what is your life going to look like in 2025? This is one of the best questions that you can ask yourself, because nothing will change if you don't first have a vision or a dream of what can change. Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. I am Douglas Peak, and I am your humble, salty pastor. And our purpose in doing this podcast is to coach you up in your faith. That basically means helping you think for yourself. Don't believe everything you hear. Know what you believe and why you believe it, and use that as a filter to listen to what people are telling you and make up your own mind. People who think for themselves have this drive within them. They will have a maturity about them. They want to know if what they believe, first and foremost, is testable. Is it tangible? Is it real? Has it been vetted? What is the verification? What is the authenticity of it? Can it be believable, or is it something that is false? They want to engage their brain when it comes to making decisions. This is not an abandonment or refutation of faith, but it is the culmination of faith, the foundation of faith. They want to know that they are building their lives on a rock solid foundation. So they don't want surface platitudes. Fluff is not enough. They want to know real, authentic truth. They want to wrestle with it because they're trying to make up their own minds. They want to think for themselves. They want their faith to be their faith. And when you do that work, your life is never the same. The amount of joy, the amount of confidence, the amount of courage, the amount of maturity, the amount of wisdom, good decision-making, prosperity, all of these things start to happen. I was listening to a guy preach the other day. He goes, when you really get serious with Jesus, when you really take it seriously, he goes, 90% of your problems just go away. Isn't that a wonderful concept that you can just live in a simple, pure, focused way where 90% of the crap in your life just goes away? Now, I don't know if you can say crap in church, but you can certainly say it on the Salty Pastor, okay? So today, this is the last day of 2024, December 31st. And so my question is, what is your life going to look like in 2025? Now, last week, during Christmas week, we talked about the need to have a sense of examination of your life at the end of the year. Now, my question is, what do you want your life to look like in the year to come? Now, most people think, hey, it's all about the time of my life, right? I want to have the time of my life. YOLO, you only live once, so go out and get as much as you can. So when I use the phrase time of your life, though, today I'm going to use it a little bit differently. I'd like you to think differently about it, because the time of your life is not about the ultimate experience in the way I'm going to use it. It's all about the time of your life. Now, all life, your life, is experienced in the framework of time. Now, this may seem, kind of strange to point out, but what I really want you to think about is the simple principle is because if you can experience life in time, that actually proves you have a soul. Oh my goodness, think about that again. The simple principle is that your capacity to experience your life in the context of time is proof that you are a spiritual person. You have a soul, and you're not a body, a material entity that thinks about spiritual or abstract or eternal things. No, you are an eternal soul that is inhabiting a material body for this period of time. Now, how do we know that? Well, let's dig into some of the stuff that the Bible teaches about time and talks about time. And one of the most famous passages in the Bible about time, written by Solomon. This was king of Israel after King David. So this was King David's son. And King David had established Israel is a powerful nation, and he had brought peace and strength and prosperity to it. Then when he died, he turned it over to Solomon, and then Solomon turned it into the greatest kingdom that Israel, that was the apex, I guess, of the kingdom of Israel in wealth and prestige and influence geographically, okay? So he wrote this book called Ecclesiastes, and it's all about wisdom. And in the Old Testament scripture, it's considered wisdom literature, similar to Proverbs. And that's why it's right next to Proverbs, is because it's just about, his musings on life and our relationship in some way to God. And so I want to read chapter 3, because chapter 3 is where he really talks about time. And listen to what he says. Now, if you're a child of the 70s, listen to the music. You remember the group, the Birds. They made a song where they just kind of sang this passage of Scripture. But I want to read the context of it. So I'm going to read the whole chapter, okay? Beginning with verse 1. Now, there is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. There's a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Now, what profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils? Now, before I keep reading, I just want to show you. He talks about all of the things. There's an appointed time for everything in life, and what he does is he talks about every experience that you're going to have throughout life, right? You're going to experience all of these things. And then he immediately says, what profit is there to the worker from that which he toils? Verse 10, I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. So he's saying, look, there's all these times and seasons in your life, but throughout them all, you will work, you will labor. And what is the value in laboring if you're going to experience, bringing together and scattering abroad, or a time for war and a time for peace, a time to love and a time to hate? Does that really make any sense? Well, look at verse 11 and see what he says. God has made everything appropriate in its time. Now, this is very important. This is why this is all tied together. And one of the things when you read wisdom literature is you want to look for common phrases that show you that what you just read needs to be read in conjunction with this portion too. Because look, he says in verse 1, there is appointed time for everything. Now, verse 11, he has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. Now that sounds strange, so let me just kind of reread it. God has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their hearts. So the fact that you are in time is proof that you have an eternal soul. Your soul has a sense of eternity. However, you will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. So even though you have eternity in your heart, you're unable to grasp what God is doing from the creation of time to the very end. Okay. Now, what's interesting is this is pre-New Covenant wisdom literature. And this is why the Israelites were like, this is a mystery. And this is why in the New Testament, it talks about how Jesus, Paul says this over and over again, is the mystery revealed. Okay. This is what God has been doing. And now we can know with confidence that it was all about Jesus. But let me go on. He goes, verse 12, I know that there is nothing better for them, meaning man, those who labor, than to rejoice and do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is a gift of God. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it, and there is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear him. And that which has been already, and that which will be, has already been. For God seeks what has passed by. Furthermore, I have seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. I said to myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man, for a time for every matter and for every deed is there. I say to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place. All came from the dust. All return to the dust. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward, and the breath of the beast descends downward to the earth? Now, isn't it interesting? He says the breath. So what is he talking about? He's talking about the soul. When you go back to the Garden of Eden, right? What did Moses and the Pentateuch say is that God breathed the breath of life into Adam, okay? And what he's saying is, how do you know? What's the difference? Verse 22, I have seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities, for that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what will occur after him? So it's really interesting is that this entire chapter is about time. It's all about purpose in life, and I believe that it is prophetic in nature. So let's just look at some of the biblical principles that we can pull out of this passage in its entire context real quickly. And remember the rules of interpretation. These things need to be absolutely affirmed by the text. They need to be read in context, and you can't read your own meaning into them. So, number one, as I pointed out earlier, this passage was written pre-New Covenant. So, what are the implications of the New Covenant on things like war and peace, a time to love and a time to hate? Under the Old Covenant, is he saying you should plan on hating, and it's okay. And you should plan on loving, and that's okay. You should plan on war, and you should plan for peace. You shall plan on killing, and you should plan on healing. So you should plan on tearing down, and you should have a time to build up. Is that the intent of what he's saying? Is that you should plan, and at the appropriate time, these things are okay? Or is he saying something else in its context? That's a very important question. Number 2, he says this: labor is meant to occupy you. In other words, it is in the doing of something that you receive the meaning and purpose of your life. The result of your labor, he says, right, is to eat and drink, and this in and of itself is good. Did you notice where he said that? He says, verse 11, he says, he has made everything appropriate in its time. He sets eternity in heart. And then verse 13, every man who eats and drinks sees good in all of his labor. So by taking the fruits of your labor, your eating and drinking, that is how you see the good in what you are doing. So the result of your labor brings about the capacity to care for yourself. Self-reliance brings a sense of self-worth or value to you as a person. And this is a side note, but this is why so many young men and women have mental health challenges and all these types of things, is because they want to rely on society to provide for them instead of trying to figure out how to provide for themselves. They need self-reliance, because it's self-reliance that brings a sense of self-worth. You will never develop a sense of self-worth if you never develop self-reliance. That's just a fact. Let's move on. He says later on, he goes, what God does remain, everything else doesn't. So only what God does is what's eternal. It reminds me a little bit of the passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where Paul is saying that only these 3 things remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And then it's really, really interesting. Verse 15, he says, that which is has been already. Okay, so what does he mean by that? Well, that which has occurred now, or what is happening right now, has already happened before in some form or another. He goes, and that which will be has already been. So you're not going to see anything new under the sun. In other words, it's all been done before, because human beings seem to have this cyclical nature. Now, we may do it differently. I mean, 5,000 years ago, maybe it was in, deer skins with throwing stones. Today, people do it in Gucci and, BMWs. But in the end, it's the same human being, right? And he goes, but this is what he says in the verse 15 at the very end. He says, for God seeks what has passed by. So what does that mean? Well, I think what this means is that there are eternal truths that remain even when everyone else forgets them. Even when they pass by and they fall out of consideration, or they fall out of popularity, or they fall out of significance, it doesn't matter. God still seeks them. So there are eternal truths that always remain no matter what. So once you read this and you read the whole chapter in context, you get an idea of how there is an appointed time for everything, and you're going to experience the ups and downs of life. I think that's the point of the first, 9 verses. But how do you find meaning and purpose through the ups and downs in life? Well, that means you're experiencing life in the framework of time. You see, time proves you have a soul. And he says this in verse 11, he has set eternity in their heart, without which man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. Now, that's a little differently than I read it the first time, because the issue here that they have is this was originally written in Hebrew, and Hebrew didn't have any vowels. It was only consonants. So when you see the early manuscripts of the Old Testament books, they don't have any vowels in them. They have no punctuation. It's just all consonants written next to each other. And they were thinking, well, what you can do is you can kind of, through context, deduce what the consonants are. And the word eternity here comes from the Hebrew word olam or olam. And so it's got two vowels and two consonants. And so it can be translated, if you change one vowel to a different vowel, in a totally different direction. Then what they did is that these writers translated the Hebrew, because it wasn't as clear as they wanted it to be, into Greek. And that's called the Septuagint. And this was done prior to the birth of Jesus, centuries before Jesus was born. It was all in Greek. It's called the Septuagint. And most of your modern day translations of the Old Testament are not taken from the original Hebrew. They're taken from the Septuagint, which is written in Greek. And the reason why they do that is because they feel that it is the most accurate in that regard. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't Hebrew scholars that, dig into these things and debate these issues, which I think is a wonderful thing, because that's what really helps us keep it so accurate, is there's scholars that are always arguing about it. That's the best thing. Competition, arguing, debating is what always keeps it so powerful, strong, and pure. So anyway, I wanted to go back to this thing. He says, he has made, he set eternity in their heart, and in the Septuagint, they can translate it, without which man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning to the end. So by experiencing your life, the ups and downs in the framework of time, what you're doing is you're proving to yourself that you have a soul, that you are a soul. And eternity has been placed in your heart. And so one of the most unique things about being a soul that has a physical body in this material realm is the capacity to consider, the capacity to think, the capacity to believe that your life can be different in the new year than it was in the past year. I mean, think about this for a moment. It's a very important principle. Everybody sits down and goes, oh, what are your New Year's resolutions? Oh, what are you going to do next year? What's it going to look like? If you could change one thing, what would you change? If your life could be different, how would it be different? And nobody ever asks the question, what gives human beings the unique capacity to actually be able to think that way? Remember how I'm always challenging you to do? It's not what you're thinking, but how you're thinking. And one of the most interesting things that proves you have a soul is that you have a capacity to think differently about your life next year than it happened in last year. A life that does not have a soul, like a tree or an animal, never sits and ponders last year, doesn't sit down. A cow doesn't sit there and go, I ate these 5 kinds of grasses last year, and one, made chewing my cud a lot more difficult, and that kind of depressed me a little bit. And so I'm going to meander over to this part of the pasture this year, and I'm going to eat this kind of grass because I feel better and I can chew my cud more easily than the year before. Life that's non-sentient, life without a soul, never, ever ponders those types of things. Dogs, cats, horses, all these animals, we love them, and we bond with them and we connect them. That's not the point. But they don't sit there and wonder about the meaning, purpose, and significance of their life. They don't. They just live in the moment each and every day. So I think what's so fascinating about it is that human beings have this unique capacity to project into the future and see their life differently in the future than it is right now. That in and of itself is remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. And it isn't just a product of a more highly evolved rational mind. What in the world is it about human nature that allows you, it almost compels you, I would say, to actually evaluate your own life, consider your life, ask yourself, am I happy or am I sad? To wonder what could change, what could be better. Have you ever thought not about, well, am I happy or sad, and answer the question, or if this was different, my life would be better, but have you ever thought about what gives you the ability to actually look into the future and see your life different than it was the year before? What is it that gives you the capacity as a human being to think about the future, and then that different future you see have a better outcome in your life? For instance, people who are lonely do this all the time. They go, well, if I were to just meet somebody or have someone to love, or if I was loved, then I would be so much happier. What is so interesting about that is not only that it could be true, but the fact that you can actually think that way. You can actually believe that, and then make changes in your life to go out and experience that. That is one of the most incredible things about being a human being. And that is the capacity to dream. What makes it possible for you to dream when you're experiencing your life in the framework of time? You see, what gives you the capacity to dream, to look towards a better future, to give yourself hope and inspiration, is the fact that you have a soul. And so my challenge for you in the coming year is, don't think about New Year's resolutions. Think about your life. About life. Here's what I want you to do. Here's what I'd like to challenge you to do. Now, this isn't telling you how to live. It's not telling you what to think. It's just simply challenging you to ask a really great question. When you dream about your life in 2025, which starts at midnight tonight, I want you to dream with your soul. I don't want you to dream about who you want to be, but who you are meant to be. Ask yourself this simple question: who am I meant to be? Now, this dream should be an expression of your soul, because it will inspire you in so many new and wonderful questions about your life. It will get you to think about your life in ways that you possibly have never thought about your life before. It gives you perspective. Absolutely gives you perspective about your life that you may never have had before. For example, if you dream about who you are meant to be, the first question you start asking yourself is this: well, who am I supposed to be? I mean, what is the authentic me? You know, I really enjoyed the movie The Legend of Bagger Vance. I really did. Matt Damon, Will Smith, and Charlize Theron. And it's, Matt Damon plays a character who was a great golfer as a young man. He was kind of a hometown hero, and people had a lot of hopes for him. They looked up to him. He was a leader. And they go off to World War I, and he has this horrible experience, and his soul is really wounded. And so Will Smith is Bagger Vance. He's a caddy who comes back to try to help him find himself a little bit. And he says, all Matt Damon does, Captain Juna needs to do, is he needs to discover his authentic swing. Now, unfortunately, there's no direction on how you actually find it. Part of it, it's kind of implicit in the a little bit. First and foremost, it had to do with the fact that there is a God. And that is that Captain Juna, Matt Damon, is changing his shoes after a really bad round of golf. And Will Smith mocks him for believing that there is no God and no purpose in life. And he says, that's just the funniest, most idiotic thing I've ever heard in my life. So it's obvious implicit. But there's a couple other things in the movie that it does, is it has to do with his untainted heart. In other words, he's got to find his authentic swing by going back to the thing that he loved when he was younger and his heart was less tainted. That doesn't mean that he wasn't sinful from a biblical doctrine standpoint, but in the movie, what they're trying to point to is, I think, get to the idea of where Jesus said, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to have the faith of a little child. And is this possible? A meaning of the phrase, Jesus has a lot to say there. We'll dig into that in another time. But what I mean, or would like you to consider, is simply this, is maybe we have to go back and discover who we are meant to be with a childlike or childhood heart. You see, when you dream about who you want to be or who you are meant to be, the best question that you will ever ask is this: how do I know what is the authentic me? I mean, how would you know what is the authentic me? The authentic you isn't just a childhood dream that you gave up and didn't pursue. No, it's something much more deeper than that. You have to ask yourself, who can I trust to tell me, lead me, guide me in helping me discover who I am meant to be? You know, when you dream with your soul and you dream about who you are meant to be in the next year, another really great question that pops up or bubbles to the surface is this, is what do I believe concerning who I am? This question alone has the most powerful elements to transform your life right there. It's not that there is an innate power in you to change your life, but what it does is it opens you up to the only power that can change your life. So ask yourself, what do I believe concerning who I am? Is my belief in alignment with reality and truth, with absolute truth, and objective truth that exists outside of me? Or is it simply what I want it to be? That right there is a very important question to ask yourself. I can't answer that for you, but people who want to think for themselves, they want their faith to grow, they want to be mature, they will wrestle with that question and they will find the answer. Well, since this is the last day of 2024, I just wanted to leave you with a blessing. And here is my blessing from the Salty Pastor over you at the end of 2024. What do you see when you look at the year ahead? Do you see a difficult journey you have to start? Do you see an uphill battle, tragedy, change, uncertainty? Do you see the end of a chapter or the beginning of another chapter in your life? Well, I'd like to challenge you to think about the coming year differently. It doesn't matter whether you see challenges, endings, new beginnings, or uncertainty. What does matter is that everything that you will face in the year to come has the opportunity to help you discover your authentic self. This is probably one of the most significant things that you will ever discover. And until you do, there will be no satisfaction in life. There will be no joy. There will be no good in your labor. You'll continue to drift, continue to feel a lack of value or significance. But when you discover who you are meant to be, only then does life truly start to change. And so this is my prayer, my hope for you in the next year, is that you start asking the right question, the very simple question: who am I supposed to be? Because when you ask, you're seeking. And when you seek, you find. Because when you ask, you're knocking. And when you knock, the door will be opened unto you. So I pray that next year, your life will be the time of your life. This is Salty Pastor signing off. And remember, always think for yourself.